We're going to kind of go through and do an overview of the core desktop application. Let's see, make sure I'm on the actual correct screen here. Perfect. So you should now be seeing a desktop application, the RealNex CRM. So we'll start off with a bit of an explanation, and like Sarah said, we'll be kind of having the equivalent but the online version of this on Thursday, and it'll actually kind of follow the same basic structure where we'll show the basics of it, but of course, as the desktop and the online and mobile app CRMs are different in what they're kind of used to accomplish, there's going to be a few variations on the webinar itself, so it's definitely beneficial to kind of see both sides of the equation in this case. But this is kind of to give you a high-level overview of a lot of the functionality in the CRM. There's probably a lot more than we could realistically cover in an hour, but this will cover the main things that most agents, most assistants, basically most people that are going to be inputting data and having to use the data will get the benefit out of. So first off, what is the CRM? Well, CRM, first off, stands for Contact Relational Manager, and as in that case, it is a piece of software to track your contacts. Now, of course, it goes beyond that, as, I mean, a Rolodex does effectively that, and you can do exactly that with your Microsoft Outlook. But the benefit of having a database like a CRM is that it also can show you other pieces of information and how they relate back to the contacts. So as the core desktop CRM by RealNex is specifically geared towards commercial real estate and that industry, all of the information is going to be centric to building your deals. So if you see right here on a contact, you see the basic information of them. It shows investor details, tenant details, whereas a basic CRM is going to just show the stuff that you'll see at the top, the name, address, company, and phone numbers. So this takes it a step further and also shows information and how they relate to real estate deals, whether they're a tenant and looking for space, whether they're investors and they have specific buyer requirements. You can track that in the CRM, as well as track your time management. So you can see your calendar, what you have scheduled on the contact level, as well as on an actual calendar. So it tracks the time management system in relation to your contacts as well. And then project and deal management is kind of what ends up tying those two things together. So your various scheduled activities can then, when they're finished, be related to a specific project. So ultimately, you can, and a project in this case can synonymously be called deal as well. And so you can relate your conversations with your clients in and how they relate specifically to specific deals that you're working on. So that means that it's a way of aggregating and storing your information on how it relates to you, the people that you deal with, the deals that you deal with, and storing that information. That way you can later use that information for anything that you need. For example, for marketing information, to be able to find specific types of buyers, to generate marketing reports, or utilize the information to just export to a spreadsheet to give to your marketing department to send out a mailer. So the idea is you input information into the CRM, and then ultimately you end up either exporting or using that information in some way once again. So before jumping into actually using the software, one thing that most people do need to do if they're on a multi-user version, and there are some settings in here that are going to be for single-user versions as well, is some user management. So real quick, the tools menu itself, as this really won't end up coming up again throughout the course, has some basic setup options in here. So first off, under options, these are going to be your personal options. So you see it's separated into a few different tabs, and you'll see that commonly throughout the CRM. A lot of information is split into different tabs. So one good thing to get in the habit of is noticing and utilizing tabs, but then again, at this point, most applications have used tabs for long enough to where it kind of becomes second nature to us. Okay, so here you can set things like the default country if you're in Canada or any other nation for that matter. Default team, we'll talk about teams in a moment here when we get to user management. Then the events history tab, you can set when your calendar starts and ends. So these are familiar if you've ever used another calendar system like Outlook even, for example, whether or not you want pop-ups. So these are basic settings for the actual software for you. Pretty basic. And then in addition to that, under the administration section, you'll also see global settings, sync master, and these will actually kind of fall outside the purview of this, as we do have a limited amount of time, but user management is the next one to talk about, and from here you can actually add and modify the users. And to quickly go over what that means, you can set up the user itself, set up what their email address is, and then set up teams as well. Now, teams is a way of having data be private to a specific set of people. So an example of a team here is retail. So in this case, if I check that, that means that any records that anybody enters in with the team retail, this user, Brittany Reed, is able to see those records. So there's always going to be records that are set to everyone, private, or you can set up individual teams in order to segregate information so only specific people on a grouped database can see that information at any given time. And then finally, there's permissions as well, where you can set whether that user's an administrator, what they have rights to do, if they can edit information like the fields themselves, whether they're able to import or export information, or whether they're able to synchronize, and so on and so forth. You can also turn off a user's ability to delete information or even add to the global team so they'd only be able to add private data. In addition to that, this is also where you'll go to set up the system tables, where you can set different event types. So if you need other event types other than the ones that we've set up in the system, you can add them through here, as well as property types. You can set them up in here, project setup. So tools is where you're going to find the basic setup stuff that you might want to take a look at before you delve too far into the CRM, but all of the information is updatable down the road, so you can also work on the fly in that case. Alright, so we'll actually start entering information from the contact level, but we'll be entering contacts, companies, properties, and all of the various types of linked type information to them as well, and show the correct, or more like best practices. As with most systems, some people are going to have, different experiences with the systems, so your mileage may vary, but this is all going to be like with the most common denominator kind of in mind. So we're going to start off by adding a contact and a company. Most of the time adding records, you can simply do it by hitting the new button at the top and selecting what type of record you want to add. Now, if we actually select contact, that'll actually give us the option of creating a contact as well as the contact or the company that contact is with. The same actually ends up going for property. So if you end up wanting to add a property as well as an owner, you can do that simply by hitting property, and then you'll be able to add the linked records as you go. But just to kind of take it a step at a time, I'll actually start with contact and create a company along with it. So I'm going to go ahead and name this contact Sarah Jones, since I don't think I've ever added her before in here. Ms. Sure, but I hate salutations because it's always confusing to me. Actually, I have to use a company that I don't have in the system because I want to add a brand new company, and you'll see exactly why that'll be important here in just a second. So we're going to go with because I'm weird, Princess Bubblegum Enterprises. Alright, so when you're entering in zip codes, one just handy little thing, when you enter in the zip code and then hit tab to go to the next field, it'll automatically fill in the city and state for you. So that's one nice thing about data entry like that, is it'll always be spelled correctly. You never have to worry that a city is going to be misspelled that way, as this is actually exactly what comes from the U.S. Post Office. So you can select contact types. So we can set this person, for example, as an investor and an agent. Enter in a phone number. Also, if you just enter the numeric information and hit tab, it'll automatically format the phone number for you as well. And voila. So now when we hit OK, we entered in a company information. It'll ask us, do we want to create a new company record for this contact? So we'll hit yes. And that's why I actually wanted to make sure it was a company name that I knew I didn't have in here, is the next time we go and add a contact, we'll add it to an existing company and see how that works. So I can just go ahead and hit OK on this. It automatically pre-populates all of this with information. One thing that's actually sometimes helpful for email addresses, if you're going to add a bunch of contacts at a specific company, like for example, let's say we're going to add this company with a Microsoft.com, and their emails are always first initial, last name at Microsoft.com. Well, if you enter in the company email as flast@Microsoft.com, when you add a contact to that company, it'll automatically come in with that email address on the contact record, and then you can just replace the flast with, for example, J. Anderson or B. Babis. Hit OK. And generally on this, once it creates the company, I'll always just hit blank fields only. And now we have our new contact record, and we see the company name here under Princess Bubblegum Enterprises is a clickable link, which if we click on that, it will bring up that company record. So with just entering in the details one time, we created two different types of records that are automatically linked to each other. So now we can easily go and add more contacts to this company or create more offices for this company. So if we wanted to go and add a second person to Princess Bubblegum Enterprises, all we have to do is go over here on the left side of the company and hit add contact. It'll automatically fill in the basic details. It'll fill in the email address and phone number from the company record. So this time we're going to go ahead and add James Dorn. I'm just making this up now. Short means less typing though. And hit OK. So at that point, once you've got the company in there, it takes just a couple of seconds each time you want to add a new contact to that company. Now, at the top of the company's section here, you'll see that it's separated into tabs once again. The address tab, which shows the company name as well as the address. But then there's also an org chart tab. Now, right now, it just shows the one location in this case, but this gives you the ability to have multiple locations with the same organization show up in one location, or in one record, so you can see it all at a glance and see all the contacts either at the company level or at the whole organizational level. So let's actually say that Princess Bubblegum Enterprises is actually RealNex. They just do business as, just don't want to lose this one. I say as I picked the longest thing in the world to type. So now that we've changed that, we now will see any other company records that have RealNex as the organization. So we actually see there's another one in Arlington Heights, Illinois at 501 West Minor, another one at 511 Main Street in San Diego, another one where we don't actually have an address for. And as we actually click on each of these, the contacts that show up here under the company level change. So we have James at the Chicago office. We have Brittany at the San Diego office. We have James and Sarah at the other San Diego office, which is apparently right down the street on Main Street. And then, of course, we have Neil Rex at the undefined office. So now if you go and add new companies, anytime you use the same organization name, so that's how it's all tied together, it has to be typed exactly the same. You can tie multiple contacts together like that. Now, in addition to showing just on the company level, you can also go into the organization level and see all of the different contacts at all of the different locations that way. All right, let's see next up. All right, so while we're talking about contacts and companies, I do want to take a moment to talk about groups as well. So if you notice on the left side of each of the windows, there's a panel here. And if you ever close that, which you can easily do by clicking that X, and a lot of people will end up doing that without necessarily realizing that they might want to use that, you can bring that back simply by going to View, selecting Panels, and choosing Status. And so you'll see the bottom section there is Groups, which gives you a list of your groups with checkboxes. So I've already got a few different groups in here: Balboa Office Prospects and Suspects, and Outlook Sync Group, which if you actually watch the webinar on synchronizing with Microsoft Office. It'll go into details on that one, and everyone should be receiving a follow-up email at the end of the webinar that'll have links to the various webinars and knowledge base articles that I'll be mentioning throughout this, and that will absolutely be one of them. And then we've got one called webinar. And so each of these are actually just checkboxes, which means if I check that, that means that Sarah Jones, the contact that we're currently looking at, is in the group Balboa Office Prospects. Simple as that. You can then bring up the contacts that are in a specific group by right-clicking on that group and activating the group. So if you notice, all of the options are actually available under the right-click menu. So when you right-click in there, that's also how you'll create a new group, how you'll delete an existing group, or modify a group, which would do something like change the name of the group or the type. So when you go and create a new group, when you right-click in a specific window, you notice I was on contacts, so the type by default is going to be contacts. The two that are going to be beneficial, though, if you want it just to show up in contacts, that's great. But if you also want this group to be usable in like properties or companies, you can change it to unknown, and that actually allows that group to show up everywhere. From here, you'll give the group a name, so Webinar Group 2, because I've obviously done this at least once before, and hit OK, and that new group will show up there. So if we wanted to just go through and add manually a few contacts here, we can do that like that, and then right-click on the group and activate the group in order to find the all of the records that we just added. Now, I'm sure if I don't end up going directly into this, it'll start stemming a few questions, as I've definitely learned that in the past. What if you want to add a bunch of contacts to a group from a list? Well, that brings us to the next section where we're going to talk about working with, instead of a single contact or a single company, a list. So there's two ways to bring up a list. When you have the contact screen or company screen, whichever window you want to switch to a list view on, you will click View and List, or it's the hotkey is F5 on your keyboard. So just F5, and that will open up a new window with that list. Now you can actually maximize these windows and play with how they actually appear. I like actually, just due to the fact that I have a decent sized monitor, I have a decent amount of screen real estate. So I like to kind of put a few windows side by side and kind of be able to see a lot of information. So one thing that I personally like doing is having the single contact view on the right side, and then the list of contacts on the left side. That way, if I double click on one of these people, like John Jonerson with the tenant company, it'll just open up that contact on the right hand side. So now I wanted to go through and figure out which of these contacts I wanted to add to a specific group. So I'm going through and adding some contacts to my Balboa Office Suspects group. So I'm going to go ahead and use this tag column on the left side. Check that for the ones that I want to add to the group. So Hyde Barton, Jack Eisler, well, Rundy, I'm not sure. So this is exactly why I like to have the two windows side by side when doing things like this. I can then go get all of the information for the contact, like, for example, see their notes, see if there's any history, realize, oh, no, this isn't the guy I was thinking of, and move on my merry way. So I'll go ahead and next add Bill Lenhart, Jenny Lee. Thank you for having that spelled like that. Lester Matson, and so on. So once you've got the contacts checked with tag that you want to add to a group, there's a little drop down here that has a tag like you'd see in a shop. And when you click that drop down, there's a few options. So show tagged will make it to where you only are viewing those tag records. Hide tagged will show you everything but those tag records. I can go back to show all, and that'll just bring us back to exactly how we started. Clear tags, which I don't want to do because I don't want to recheck anything. Tag all, which should be relatively self-explanatory. You can see the total number of contacts here is 189, so that would tag all 189 records. Then there's load tags, which would be able to bring up a group in a list. That's outside the purview of this right this moment, as that's really not used as much as the opposite, which is save tags. Save tags is how you then add these contacts to a specific group. When you click on that, you'll either be able to create a new group for these tags, or like I said, I wanted to add them to an existing group, add tags to existing records in group, Balboa Office Suspects, hit OK, and it adds those 10 records that I checked. I didn't actually realize it was that many records. All right, let's see. All right, so one that I forgot to actually add to this. Let me do this real quick. It's probably better on properties. Okay, so and George, I will go ahead and get to your question at the end, but I just want to let you know that and take a second for anybody that came a little bit late. If you do have any questions, feel more than free to ask them throughout, and then at the end I'll actually go through in order and answer any questions that there are. So there will be time for Q&A at the end, but feel more than free to ask them ahead of time as, you know, first come, first served, not to mention it's probably fresh in your mind at that time. So please, if there's anything I gloss over a little bit, and that's definitely something that I can, that I will be covering. Probably, it's got a, like, that actually will have another webinar entirely on it in the next couple of weeks, so I'll touch on that in a little bit here. So with that, I'm actually going to go on to the next section where we'll talk about properties. So properties are just another type of record, similar to a contact. A contact, you know, you've got the person's name, company name, address, and so on. A property is similar in that, you know, you've got the property name and address, but then it also has linked contacts. By default, it'll have a property owner, an agent, and a site contact that you can link directly. And so to add a new property as well as the owner, you just go to property, or go to new and select property. And so you're going to be greeted with a screen that has just really basic property information, exactly what I just mentioned. The name of the property, where it's located, and who the three primary contacts that are associated with that property are. So let's go ahead and do this here. So we're going to make a multifamily property right now just for fun. And I always like using my zip code because it never comes up. I have an old database, so that means it's actually 243. You actually, if you notice, I have the 2006 postcode database because this demo database that we use has been like that forever. I just put it on my mental checklist to do this later, but I'll go ahead and just do the surrounding one that it broke off from. So we enter the basics, and then we have three drop-downs here for the contacts. Most of the time, most people are going to be dealing with properties and owners when they're doing this, or properties along with tenants that are in the spaces, which we'll get into here in a moment. But in this case, for an owner, we can either select a contact or select an existing company. So it's usually a good idea to be consistent with which ones are going to be marked as your owners, and there's a few benefits to each of them. All right, with owners, it doesn't look. There's not really a huge benefit either way, to be honest. With tenancy, it makes a little bit more of a difference, but with owners, it's a matter of personal preference whether you want to deal at the company level or at the contact level. But the important thing is basically to remain consistent. So if you track owners as companies and then you have the contacts linked to those companies, or if you track them as contacts and kind of leave the company portion of it out of the equation, neither of them is really going to necessarily be better or worse than the other. But again, everyone's mileage is probably going to vary as everyone, you know, uses systems quite a bit differently than one another. And so, you know, personal preference comes in a lot. So in this case, we're going to go ahead and of course, you can do new contact or new company as well. And if we do new contact, we'll see that exact same screen that we got when we hit new and contact. So this is nice in that, you know, you learn one thing and it kind of flows on to the other aspects of it in this sense. So I'm just going to go ahead and do select contact, and it'll bring up a search window, and just search for read. There you go. And hit OK. And then you can also, of course, attach an agent, but process is exactly the same. So once you hit OK, if you didn't have the properties window open previously, it will open the properties window with that property that you just added there. We see the information that we added strictly at the top. So we'll see that almost all records on these main sections are separated into an address section, an info section, and a list section. So first off, in the address section, we've got the property name and address information, as well as those linked site contacts, which we did not add, the owner, and the agent. And of course, these are links as you see them blue and underlined. If we click on that, it will open that contact over in the contact window. So score another point for having two windows open side by side and not having to navigate back and forth between them by doing that and then trying to figure out where you are, clicking the X and going back to the property. And you can actually even do this. If you had it open full screen like that, you can then go to Window and Tile Vertical, and it'll automatically put them side by side for you, although it's not going to necessarily know which one you want on the left or right. I'm fine with this personally, though, so we'll go with it. Next up, the Info section. So the Info section is going to be a little different on contacts and properties, as that's going to be the the main the details, the more detailed information. So we see here we've got building class, construction type, and it's separated into a number of tabs. The detail tab is going to have more detailed information, information on specific property types. So some of this is going to be specific to retail businesses. Some of these are going to be specific to office type or industrial. Units, this allows you to set up multifamily unit mixes for multifamily buildings. Spaces allows you to enter the individual leasable spaces for your office, retail, and industrial properties that have leasable spaces. Listing is going to have the financial details, whether the property itself is for lease or for sale, and what if is exactly a copy of for sale that is just information to calculate, as most of these are calculated fields. User fields is a set of 12 fields plus 3 date fields, 3 number fields, and a notes field that are just there for additional fields if you run over the amount that you want to track here. So they're named by default user 1 through user 12, but all of the fields in the CRM are customizable, at least in the name category. So if you want to change the name of one of these fields, you just right-click on the field itself and go to Properties. And that's going to have a section for caption there. So under caption, you can change the name to whatever, and I'm going to take that literally, change it to whatever. And when we hit OK, that is now the name of that field across the entire database. If you have multiple people using the shared version of the database, everyone is going to see that change. So you definitely want to be all on the same page when changing fields, and it's definitely something to do on a not too regular of a basis and kind of get them set in stone when you're starting out. So kind of think about what pieces of information you need to track. That way you can kind of set up the database a little bit and customize it to your own needs. You don't necessarily need to use the user fields. What a lot of people will do is just utilize some of the fields on the general tab, as the odds are really, really good that we did not 100% perfectly guess exactly what fields you wanted in this section. So all of these are also customizable. So we see actually here the bottom right is normally map coordinates, but I've changed that in the past to number of bicycle racks. That really obviously doesn't apply to that, so we can change it back and change it to map coordinates. Again, just change the caption. You can also change the color of the field so a specific field will stand out to you. Hit OK, and that is globally changed. The one thing to watch for, though, is each field has a data type that cannot be changed. So this field right here at the bottom right is always varchar, which means variable character, and the number is how many characters you can input into that field. So that means letters, numbers, special characters, periods, ampersands, tildes, and other fun characters can be added to that field to your whim fancy. In addition to varchar or varchar, I'm not really 100% sure how that would be pronounced. There's fields that are int, which stands for integer, meaning any whole number over 1 can be put into those fields. Or actually, I think it's actually just any whole number. I think negative is actually possible. A field like acres is going to be a decimal field, similar to integers, except it allows for 2 decimal places. And then finally, there are date fields, which will have slashes in the middle of them and allow you to track, you guessed it, dates. If you click on the little button there, it'll give you a little date selector. So you have to be mindful of the various data types as those cannot be changed. So when you're changing a field name, make sure that it's consistent with what you want to put in the field. If it's an integer field, for example, you don't want something where you have to, have a range. 1500 to 2000, while it seems like a number, technically isn't, because only the 1500 and the 2000 are. The dash in the middle makes it not. Well, let's see, that wasn't actually even on the... Okay, so we ended up going on to a record that actually does have spaces, so we can kind of get a glimpse and see. This is what a retail building would look like with spaces in it. So you see that each of these are actually individual spaces that are linked to the property, and double-clicking on one would actually open up that record in another window off to the left here. So from here, this is where you can also associate the specific space with a specific tenant. And like any other time, it's got a drop down with select contact or company, or new contact or new company. So we're going to go ahead and put Sarah into this space here. Hit OK. And now Sarah Jones is the tenant on this space. We'll hit save here. And over on the property record, we see now that that tenant shows up in that list. So this gives you a quick glance of the individual leasable spaces if you deal with leasing. Kind of in the same way that owners and properties tie to one another, tenants and spaces are how those contacts tie to the properties, basically. With, let's go ahead and find a multifamily building with some of these already entered. There's probably exactly one property in this entire, there's two properties in this entire database. So here we have the Genesee Park Apartments, and we can see exactly what we probably expected to see, a unit mix breakdown for a multifamily property. You can see the number, the types of units, how many of each of those units there are, square footage range, and so on. If you double click on one of these, it will open up that unit mix in another window so you can edit the information, add new rows. So let's say that they also have a 5-bedroom. This is an insane apartment complex because of how many times we've added stuff to this. But yeah, sure, they have a 5-bedroom, they have 5 of these, and we'll call it a 5-bedroom, 5-bath apartment. Actually, and so on. So if we hit save here, that adds it to that list, and thus we'll see it on the main property screen as well. So this basically just opens up an edit window so where you can add or edit the actual unit mixes within the building. Which brings me next to the list section at the bottom, which is where you can track your scheduled activities. In this case, we don't have any scheduled with this apartment complex, but we might if we actually go over to contacts. That's spaces. If we go over to contacts and find a contact that's actually... So that will show you any upcoming activities you have with that person. Projects will show any deals that that record is associated with. So this project is in relation to, let's see, a specific project. It relates to the Genesee Park Apartments, as it's actually, there's a deal on this property in our projects database. Leads will show you any projects where this, in this case, this property, where it would fit as a potential match to close a deal. So in this case, it would be for specific buyer rep transactions, potential deals, is what each of these represents. A contact could be for a, could show up as leads for tenant rep or buyer rep deals as well, or owner rep deals as well. History will show your history of your phone calls, your emails, reminders, and we'll actually delve into that a little bit more, but that actually has its own webinar during this series on it where we'll talk about deal and project management in a lot more depth. So it will seem like we're only touching on it today, and that's absolutely true, but we have an entire webinar devoted specifically to talking about history, projects, deals, and leads. So it'll be kind of a little bit of a touch on today and in full depth. I believe it's in 2 weeks on that one. 1 second here. I apologize. Anytime seasons change, I expect like about a month of my throat needing me to cough every few minutes. So if you hear me go mute for a second, that's exactly why. And it's literally the second day of spring right now, so probably about at the height of it right at the moment. Um, so thanks for your patience on that. So history is going to be a historical log of your phone calls, your emails to clients, or on the projects themselves, how they relate to the deals. So if we go to history on a specific client, we see a couple of notes that we created for this person. We see back in June of 2015, we called them about Balboa office, and then we called them also on June 10th about Washington Avenue apartments. Links will show any related linked records. So by default on a property, you're going to end up with a link to the owner of the property that was created, but you can also manually link any records together here. So we see a number of links on this one contact record. So Rachel is actually the owner on these 8 buildings here, is the site contact for Balboa Office Park, tenant in Grove Business Park, and is the buyer on multiple comp records. So she is a busy gal, without a doubt in this case. Might be because she's first alphabetically, and that's just why that contact always comes up and ends up getting linked to things, but I prefer to think of her as a go-getter. Next up, attachments. So attachments allows you to attach files, as the name would apply, to the given records in your database. This means you can attach photos, you can attach PDF documents, Word documents, really anything that's a file on your computer. If you can drag and drop it in a Windows folder, you can drag and drop it directly into this attachment section and have that show up. So let's just see here. I've got, I have something that doesn't really have anything weird in it. Oh, here. If you just drag and drop a file from a folder and drag it directly into this attachment section. No, I can't actually do it while sharing because it turns off a lot of Windows functionality. So you can either drag and drop directly from a folder on here, but you can also right click and add to browse for a specific file, double click and hit OK, and that'll attach that file. You can always double click on it once again to open it, and it will open that file in whatever application you need it to open in. And then notes allows you to have a little blurb of notes. This person is really a go-getter. I'm just driving the point home here. All right, so that's properties. So next we're going to go into the time management system a little bit and talk about scheduling activities and finishing those activities, how to start the deal process and tracking the basic information about a deal, and we'll kind of get to a point where you'll be ready to go for the webinar that delves in specifically on deal management and tracking all of these things. So, I mean, the basics of scheduling a reminder are first off, you bring up the person that you want to set up a reminder with. So your best bet for that is to search by contact. Let's theoretically say we're doing this with a specific contact, so we'll do that, and we'll do Jonathan Anderson. So I'm just going to type in part of the person's name, and you can either hit search contact or F12 is the hotkey for that, as this is something that I use regularly. That's one of the hotkeys that I definitely remember. F5 for a list, F12 to bring up a search window. So I'll type part of the person's name in the name. Of course, you can search by any of these fields here as well. So you can search by company name, search for contacts by company name, or you can even search companies and then go that route. So as it only had one match, it brought up that one contact record, Jonathan Anderson. However, if we brought up someone that had multiple, it would instead give us a pick list to choose from. I'm still going to pick Jonathan Anderson though. And so to schedule an activity with that person, there's a big schedule button on the toolbar. If you click on that, on the down arrow, you'll get some options: phone call, meeting, follow-up, and so on. If you just hit the button by itself, it'll just bring up the window itself and set the event type to whatever your default is under tools and options. By default, the default is set to other, but you can change that under that option there. So let's say in this case we're going to go ahead and schedule a meeting with Jonathan Anderson actually. Meet over coffee to discuss stuff. Very specific. Next, this is where you can associate that specific activity with a specific deal that you're working. So let's say that we're meeting over coffee specifically regarding Balboa Office Park. Perfect. We can select that from this list, and we'll go into in a moment how to actually add that deal as well. Next, this is probably relatively familiar to most of you, as it's going to be very similar to any other time management system out there. You pick what it's about, when it is, whether or not you want an alarm, who it's with, and any notes about that. So let's say we're actually scheduling this for Monday next week. I want an alarm to pop up. It's a meeting, so I want it to remind me an hour ahead of time. Participants, you to actually set reminders, not just for yourself, but other users on your same database as well. And then you can also link this one reminder to multiple contacts. So let's say in addition to Jonathan, we also want to be calling Tim Cray. Perfect. Do that, hit OK. And when we go to events now, if we scroll to the present, in 6 days we see that we have a reminder that's going to pop up that says meet over coffee to discuss stuff. If we go to Tim's record, we'll see that exact same information there under history here. Or, sorry, under events. I was on the right place from the get-go. Meet over coffee to discuss stuff. So to add a project, so again, the new button is going to have that exact same option, project, but I'm actually going to go ahead and go into projects by going to view projects first. And rather than add an additional project to my database, I'll actually show you one that's already in the works, as it takes a while to populate a project and make it really useful, as one of the ultimate end goals of it is to be able to generate marketing reports on these projects, so you can kind of get an aggregate of all of the information, or all of your your conversations, everything that you've sent on a specific deal, and put it into a report that you can share with your client to show what you've been doing in order to market their deal. So we'll be working with the Balboa Office Park deal here. 1 second. And we see here, first off, the project name, and then what type of project it is. So these are the different default options. You can actually set up more than what's on there by going to System Tables Project Setup and adding additional project types there. But in this case, it's a property for sale, but other examples would be a property that's for lease, which would also be landlord rep, buyer rep, tenant rep, or just a generic opportunity type. So I'm going to do, this is always going to be a for sale property in this case, and that actually determines ultimately what types of records are going to be the leads on a record. Ends up ultimately going outside the purview of this though, but the main issue is making sure you have a project in here. You can always go back and add this information later, but if you want to start tracking any of your conversations on a deal, first thing to do to add that deal is just create a new record, give it a project name and a type. The type is also important because that sets the status, where along the pipeline that deal actually is. So as this is a for sale property, these are the different statuses that are available. Right now we're prospecting on it, let's say. So this will move along as the deal progresses. So, once you get an offer, you can do offer pending, or make an offer, or offer received, and so on. So that's the basics of actually adding a project, and one of the primary purposes of that is to be able to track history. I mean, calendars actually, your scheduled phone calls and meetings, those are actually just the opposite side of a history, which is a finished version of those. So that means that there's two primary ways to add history. So one, let's say that we, on a whim decided to call Tim. We just thought of him last night when we were thinking about Balboa Office Park and realized that that actually might be something right up his alley, or he might have a buddy that's looking for exactly, that sort of property. We decided to call him when we want to track the histories for that. A couple ways to do that even. First off, the most basic way is to hit the history button. When you're on a contact record, that the system will know to add that in as a into that contact itself. as you see here with link 2. Now you'll notice, first off, this looks remarkably similar to the schedule activity screen. And that's absolutely the case because they're really two sides of the same thing. History just being activities that have already happened. Sometimes you had a reminder for it, sometimes you don't. But if you do, it makes it a lot easier to just turn that reminder into a history record from that. So that's the other way that we'll talk about in a moment. So let's say called about Balboa office call project. We'll just drop this down and select that project that we've been dealing with here. We just called him now. Wants us to send him some information that over to John to send marketing details. So from here, we can also then schedule a follow-up. So we got the details over to John to send marketing details. Let's actually schedule a follow-up and call back in a week. Marketing details, follow-up. A week will be the 28th. And let's say we want to schedule this for 10:30. If you notice, the project/lead is automatically still associated with Balboa Office Park, so everything that we're doing is populating the contact record. So if we end up coming back to Tim, a few months down the road, we'll see, oh yeah, we talked to him back on the 21st of March about Balboa Office, and of course by then these will also have gone over there as well. But not only that, it'll also show up if we go look at the project and we want to see what we've done specifically on that project, or to generate a marketing report down the road for exactly that as well. So, like I said, there's another way to add these add a history record, and that's from these scheduled activities. So let's say March 27th comes and goes, and we meet over coffee to discuss stuff with Tim. We can come into our CRM, right-click on that activity in here, and choose Finish. And that will bring up the history record screen, automatically populated from the details that were in the actual reminder. From here, we can go and put notes in here. So, was a fruitful meeting. Had bananas. Get it? Gives bananas fruit. Hit OK. And so that will move it from the event section and add it to the history section. And so we see, was a fruitful meeting, had bananas. So ultimately, one of the primary reasons to do this is that once you've been populating a bunch of history on a specific project, so you've been cold calling people, you've been sending marketing details out, and your project's starting to look a little bit more like this, where you have a scrollable number of work that you've been doing in order to try to market that specific property. You can then use the system to generate a marketing report by going to Report and Marketing Report and selecting your options from here, and that will give you a printable PDF or actually Word doc, or most formats that you would possibly need, either printable or electronic. I'll actually end up going into details on that on the upcoming webinar on deal management, as this will take a few minutes to run, and I don't have it set up to where it'll actually work on the first try right now anyway. So it would actually be sitting here watching it for about 5 minutes, Ben. So in addition to that, one thing that didn't really have a place exactly during the timeline is a little bit of discussion on the Office integration. So another thing that you can kind of do with this information. Actually, one thing I didn't touch on is querying, so that's a good segue with Office integration. So I was mentioning that you want to enter in the information on the actual records that you want to track and that's important for you. One of the primary reasons that you'll want to do this is being able to generate queries of your database in order to find specific records and use that information for whatever your needs. In our case, we're going to go ahead and let's have a theoretical here. We want to find all of the owners of buildings between 25 and 35,000 square feet in San Diego and export a list of those contacts to Excel. The last part of that the export part, we could replace that with send an email through Microsoft Outlook using the email merge functionality, or letter blast through the Word mail merge functionality. But the first part, though, is the query. So we want to find, first off, all of our buildings, and this is because we know we have a 30,000 square foot building in San Diego, and we want to find some potentially interested parties to make a prospect list. So a few different ways to query. You can right-click on the field that you want to search by and select the query option. So in this case, one of the fields that we wanted to search was building size. So if we choose query on that, it's going to bring up this query window. And this will, first off, fill in the field with the field that you right-clicked on. And then operator is how to search. So in our case, we wanted two values, between, and then below that, you'll search how you want to choose the values that you want to do between. So 25,000 and 35,000. Now, if you change this option for the operator, that'll change what your options are. So you can do things like is empty to find all of your properties that you don't have the square footage for. Some of those are more functional in other fields than others, I will admit. So the first step is finding all of our properties in that square footage range. We hit OK. First off, we have 197 properties total. When we hit OK, that number drops to 21. So that means there's 21 properties that we have the square footage range between 25 and 35,000 square feet. The next part is we wanted to eliminate any properties that, you know what, we're actually going to search for them in Las Vegas specifically, just because we have more of those. So the other way that you can query, in addition to right-clicking on the field, is you can also use this drop-down here and select Query. Now, if you notice, if you already have a query set, on the left side here, you have three different options now available. Replace current query, we'll just ignore the query that you just did and replace it with whatever we're doing here. Drill down within current query is effectively the word and. So if you string together the two queries and just read them in English, drill down is the word and, add to current query would be the word or. So the query itself, we want to select first the city. We wanted this everything in the city of Las Vegas. So we can do city. I'm actually not going to use is. I'm going to just show a different way of doing this. Do ends with and use Vegas. So just another way to search, and actually it'll be a little bit more inclusive, because if you do is Las Vegas and you happen to have a property that's the city is Las Vegas without a space between the two, it wouldn't necessarily show up, whereas with this one it would. So our first query was building size is between 25,000 and 35,000 square feet. The next thing we do is read this as and, so and city ends with Vegas, meaning our 21 should go down in number and be replaced just with whatever ones are in Vegas between that square footage range. Bam, we've got 11 properties. I also said that we wanted to do this specifically to the owners. So one next step is going to be under the lookup menu. There's an option there for linked. And from there, you can just click on owners, and it will, in the contact window that we have over here, it brought up the 10 contacts that own these 11 properties. If you notice, it also opened up a company window, which is exactly one of the reasons that it's important to be consistent and have your owners be either contacts or companies, but not a mixture of both, because then this will end up opening up two windows, one with the contact owners and one with the company owners. So from there, we can then go to View, List, and right on our toolbar when we switch to a list view is an Excel button, which will send exactly what we're seeing to Excel. So if you wanted to modify which columns end up getting exported in this case, now's your chance to do that by using this drop down here on the left side, dropping that down, selecting fields, and then you get a selector on the left side. You can just double click on the fields that you want to add, and you can also move them around using these up and down buttons on the right side. There was a lot of fun to be had with this field selector screen. Hit OK though, and that will change what you're seeing here. And this is exactly what you see is what you end up getting in Excel. So you hit the Excel button, and that's exactly what will end up going in this case. And that was actually where I had it ending in that case. So there were a couple, one question so far. Can you generate a prospecting list on a daily basis? So yeah, like I said, that actually I covered it a little bit in the groups, but that will be delved into on the deals management webinar, as that will talk about generating prospect lists and different ways of doing so. Like some examples can be you can actually go into your that last thing that we use, the lookup linked. It's actually available in a lot of places. So one other way that you can actually use that is when you're on your dashboard and you're on the, for example, history. This is set up exactly for this. We see that there's a query set, so it's only showing me my history records for the project Balboa Office Park and none in the past. So if I wanted to do all of them, I can use that. You can then use lookup linked contacts and use that to generate a prospecting list. A number of other ways to do it would be like finding all of your contacts that don't have that haven't had a history record in the last X amount of time. But again, that will be delved into more on the project management webinar. And as this is getting rather close to the amount of time, if you do have any other quick questions, by all means ask away. But if anything wasn't answered in this webinar, feel more than free to shoot an email to us at support. You can reach us at support@realnex.com, and we will get back to you with a response if you have any quick questions or anything that doesn't necessarily make sense, or you've started utilizing a few of the things that you learned here and just wanted to learn a little bit more. By all means, shoot us an email. We'll always be happy to answer any questions that you may have. But I haven't seen any additional questions come in, and as it's been about an hour, I'm not overly surprised by that, as I've done this one enough to kind of pre-answer most questions that end up coming in on a regular basis. So Sarah, if you want to play me out, that's all I really had for today.
All right, thanks, Bobby. For those of you attending today, I will send you a follow-up email tomorrow with the links that Bobby mentioned, and also send you a link for the upcoming webinar so you can check those out as well. So thanks for joining us, and we hope to see you back here soon. Bye.